Space shapes behaviors. Behaviors create culture, and culture drives results. This is the More Than a Chair podcast by Business Furniture Choreo, where we're creating space for innovation, for dreamers, and for the next big idea. Welcome to the More Than a Chair podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Clark. Are offices a thing of the past? As the pandemic and stay-at-home orders have left offices empty, it has many people asking if our days in the office are over. Well, this conversation, it isn't anything new. Technology and demands for flexible work life have had Americans working remotely for years. But this has been sudden, and it's a drastic change, all connected to the coronavirus. And it's reignited the questions around if offices are a necessary part of business. So to get some perspective, we have with us today Matt Waggoner, Managing Director at JLL in Indianapolis. Now, Matt leads a tenant representation advisory team, partnering with organizations to create and execute a real estate strategy to retain and attract top talent. Also joining us is Mary Beth Oakes, CEO of Business Furniture Choreo. Hey guys, I'm so glad you could be here today.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Amanda. Thanks for having us.
Matt, we are just so excited to have you here and get some of your insight and perspective about what you think about this concept and these conversations happening right now. What are you hearing out in the field when it comes to office space? Are we done? Is it a thing of the past?
Yeah, well, there's certainly no shortage of opinions on this topic, and all of those from highly qualified opinions to people who have no idea what they're talking about. And everybody's got an equal platform with social media, so it's kind of entertaining to watch the spectrum of opinions. Over the last few weeks, you've had people from executives like Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, who's proclaiming that there's going to be more demand for office space and companies are going to need more space because of this social distancing impact and the need to kind of spread people out within a space. And then you've got, companies like Twitter who have told their employee base that they're going to allow people to work from home permanently or indefinitely. So there's no shortage of opinion from people out there on what the forward-looking plan is for office space. But I think there's a couple things that we kind of evaluate or recognize right now. The first one is that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and there's probably going to be thoughts that are a bit more dire than when we come out of this on the other side. So I think that we are expecting the volatility of responses around this topic and not surprised by it. And then I think the second thing is that the one thing I can guarantee for sure is that it's not going to be either end of the spectrum. And that is that things are going to remain the exact same way they were, looking back 2 or 3 months ago. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end would be that everybody's going to be 100% remote. So I think when we look at that spectrum of everybody's remote or everybody's operating exactly as they were before this pandemic, I feel 100% confident in saying that neither one of those two opposite ends of the spectrum will be the case coming out of this. And where you land on that spectrum is probably, it's based around what type of workforce you have, what type of work that you do, what type of roles they have. And I think that there's absolutely a place, an increased place for remote work going forward. The question is how much? And that's something that I don't think anybody has the answer to yet on the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary Beth, I mean, people may be kind of surprised and interested in some of your insight and perspective on this because you're the CEO of Business Furniture Choreo. It's what you do is set up offices, but you've been talking about remote work for a long time and how that can impact a culture and having bosses and managers understand what that looks like. What do you think about the future of the office space?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I know for a long time, our company and many companies that we've worked with, they have been supportive of remote work, but not really as the primary work style, right? It's really been, work from home when you need to, or work remotely a day or two a week. And I think that's been great. Now, for some companies, it was a pretty dramatic shift because maybe they didn't have anybody working remotely, and now suddenly they do. So what I think is really fascinating right now is that technology seems to be sorting are supporting us pretty well in terms of remote work. I'm amazed actually at how well things like Teams and Zoom and other platforms support how we work. And I think that's been great. And I think it's been reassuring to people that have to work remotely now. And I think even in the beginning, it kind of seems exhilarating, like you have all this freedom and you can work, remotely. But I think over the long haul, I guess what I'm interested in understanding is what is the impact on culture? What does this really mean to the culture of the organization? And I think so many organizations that we have worked with have really been placing an emphasis on culture and engagement and creating an environment and a company where people want to work. And so I guess, what I'm interested in finding out over the long haul is what does this do to culture when more people are working remotely? And I agree, Matt, I think you're right that it really is going to depend on what type of work that you do. I think there are going to be some roles, some positions that I think will be really well suited for remote work over the long haul. But I think when you're in a position where, you're trying to spark innovation and new ideas and creativity, I do think there's going to be potentially a bump in how you do that, remotely. So I guess I feel like it's a spectrum too. And, I think a lot of organizations are going to find that need for people to be face to face with each other, to spark innovation and creativity and connection. So it'll be interesting to see where that lands. And I would imagine that, maybe 6 months to a year from now, there'll be some additional studies on culture and how this really changes people's behaviors.
Yeah. Mary Beth, one thing I was going to say on that note, it's almost like the could we, should we question. I think a lot of organizations by this forced remote work trial, call it, have answered the question that we can. We can work from home. We can work remotely. That's possible. So then the next question that they'll have to evaluate is, should we? And the reason for that is, what are the other impacts outside of just productivity and efficiency? For example, innovation, community culture, all those different kind of softer topics that might be compromised or might not be as effective if we're not physically gathered in space. So I think, I don't know, with the whole reentry timeline, how quick those questions will be answered, because I think it will be a little bit awkward for the next 12 to 18 months or so. But I think that will be the next question that organizations are focused on is, we understand that we are physically capable of it. We're technologically capable of it. The question is it the best thing for our business or not?
Absolutely. I was talking to a client and they were talking about their summer intern program and they want to move forward with it. But on the other hand, they're thinking, how do we really create the same experience for those interns that they would have had if we were all working together? And I think that's a really interesting question when you think about that talent management piece. How do you attract talent and how do you, once you onboard somebody, how do you give them that experience where they can get connected with their teammates so that they can do really good work with their teammates? And I think those are going to be some of the big challenges coming forward as people are added to teams and or even if you reconfigure a team and, trying to get that team to really connect via Zoom or via Teams. It's just a different challenge. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch over the next several months.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And certainly new hires is not something that's, again, for but a small percentage of the organizations out there. Most companies are not in a big hiring wave right now. So that's a great point that they haven't really experienced a significant onboarding and the kind of cultural dynamics of that in this remote work environment.
Matt, one thing we've been talking a lot about is this now, near, and far kind of timeline with what to expect as folks start coming back to the office. Let's talk about the now. What's some of the advice you're giving to your clients or businesses as they're talking about, okay, we don't know what it's going to look like in 12 weeks. We don't know what it's going to look like in the next year. What should we be doing right now? What kind of advice have you been giving?
Yeah. So the right now for us is centered around two things. The first one is this reentry into the workplace, for organizations that have a physical work environment, just helping them think through and talk through strategies around what reentry and then potentially another re-exit and another reentry might look like. And just communicating those things to let people know that I used the term awkward earlier. It's going to be a little bit awkward relative to physical office space occupancy over the next 12 to 18 months until there's a larger, solution for the virus. So I think that's the first thing, is just kind of disarming people and saying, to think that you're just going to jump back in full capacity is not probably a wise thought or a realistic thought. So that's one thing. The second thing is, for companies that, we're specifically on the side of helping organizations with their, workplace strategy, their office space strategy. And so a lot of that comes to helping them find and secure office space. And so for companies that don't have to make a decision about that right now, our goal or our message to them is be slow and observe. Because again, we are in the midst of this pandemic. So for you to rush into making a decision that might be a 5 to 10 year kind of committal decision on how you're going to work and operate, we think that there could be a lot more to be learned and gained over the next 12 months or so. And that's everything from health and safety. This we call it spatial distancing instead of social distancing, because if you socially distance in the office, then why would you come to the office in the first place? So the spatial distancing concept, so that's, maybe the more health and safety side. You have the technology piece, which is enabling folks to work from anywhere. So just to observe those things and how they're playing out over the next 12 months before making a longer committal decision, knowing that they could use whatever they learn over the next 12 months as a differentiator for kind of the workplace of the future as they start to form that going forward.
What do you think remote employees are missing right now? I mean, I could tell you both what I'm missing. I miss my friends. I miss coffee. I miss all those opportunities. I'm sick of working in my home office. But what do you think remote employees are missing right now as they work in their home office environments?
Yeah. So I'll just speak from personal experience first. We have the team that I lead has a call 3 times a week. We have an all company, and when I say call, video call. We have an all company call once a week. We have an executive team call once a week. In all these calls, they just don't replace face-to-face interaction. I mean, everything from, the reading human cues to nobody's internet's perfect. So I feel like we're like 10 weeks into this thing, but somebody still has audio cutting out or their screen freezes, and it's just not the same. I mean, I just miss seeing my people that I work with day to day. I miss seeing people face to face, the human interaction piece, which for me personally, it gives me a ton of energy. It helps me feel more connected to what we're doing every day. And I think it helps us as a collective team feel more connected to how we're serving our clients and helping our clients every day, because we kind of see the purpose a little bit more, and we're more connected to that. So I think that's one thing. And I would, categorize that as the sense of community. And then the second thing, Mary Beth hit on it, but it's this idea of innovation. And, I am a firm believer. And again, this is not across every industry or every company, because some companies don't rely on innovation to do what they do. But for the companies that do, I just don't think that there's a replacement for the face-to-face collaboration and the impact of being able to, ideate when you're all together. I mean, you can certainly do it. You can do your best with the remote work setting, but I think that's a big piece that's missed in this time of remote work. I think a few things that aren't missed right now, especially for those that are in bigger cities, are the commutes, and maybe even people in Indy commuting to work every day, the congestion of potentially the office space or the building. You talk to companies in the bigger cities, and they're saving 3 to 4 hours a day per employee with commutes and getting into the office and that sort of thing. So I don't think people are missing that. And I think that people are, at least from what I'm hearing, taking advantage and making the best of the unique time that they have together with family or loved ones or whomever it is by being at home fully. So I do think that there's some, you can flip it and turn the positives of this time that we have together. But personally, I think that the first two things that we miss aren't replaced, or I don't see them being as replaced by remote work.
Mary Beth, what do you think remote employees?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yesterday, our office, reopened, and we've had really that mantra that we're going to meet people where they are. And so I think out of our whole team, we only had about 18 people that had signed up to come back to work the first week. And yesterday was the first day. And on that day, I think maybe 6 or 7 out of the 18 of us were actually there. And so
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I mean, to echo what Matt said, I mean, our leadership team, we also meet frequently every week. You know, we use Zoom or Teams, but, you know, yesterday was the first chance that our senior leadership team had a chance to actually meet in person. And it was wonderful. And for the leader of that team, for me to be able to connect and to see body language and to read expressions and just to be in the same room. Now, granted, we were socially or spatially distanced. As
Mm-hmm.
Matt said, you know, we had 6 feet between us, but it was just awesome just to be there together and to talk. I mean, I was so happy just to be with them, but just to really have a good conversation and just to see them. And I think you miss so much when you're on those calls. I mean, it's really difficult, obviously, to read body language. And, you know, sometimes in a given conversation, maybe 80% of what somebody communicates is through nonverbal. And so to be able to kind of read their nonverbal was wonderful. I loved it. So I think those are the things that I'm missing. I'm missing that same sense of community and just to be able to be together. But I do think it's really interesting right now. We still have a lot of team members that aren't able to come back yet for various reasons. And I'm hoping that we all get back together soon because I do think it makes a difference. Like Matt was saying, I think it's hard to replicate that face-to-face interaction. I had read a study several years ago. I think it was in the Harvard Business Review about, you know, in-person meetings are 6 times more effective than trying to do something remotely. And that does just have to do with the nonverbal and just reading cues and et cetera. But so I think that's going to be interesting. But I know something, Matt, I wanted to ask you. I've been reading a lot. There have been a lot of critics and, you know, a lot of articles I've read that say, oh, open office, you know, really can really cause the virus to get spread more quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
this just means it's another, you know, nail in the coffin of open office. And I know, Matt, we've talked about this before, and I always get frustrated when I read those articles and they don't give you any context on what kind of open office it is, because I'm a big believer that you have to have an ecosystem of different types of spaces. I mean, some that give you privacy, some that give you opportunities for collaboration. So when I read those articles, I'm always skeptical about, you know, how were those workplace strategies built and what kind of spaces do they contain? But what are your thoughts about that? I mean, do you feel, I mean, does the open office have any kind of role in terms of the spread of the virus, or is it more about personal accountability, no matter in what type of workspace you're working in?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and this is interesting that you brought up open office, because that over the last 4 to 5 years has been that, and again, you and I have talked about this, Mary Beth. It's the word that like annoys me more than anything else, because it's such a uniform statement on something that could mean so many different things. And so I think when people think open offices, they think, you know, some people are packed in like sardines on top of each other, and it's loud and it's, you know, all that stuff. They kind of assume like the worst environment. Open office is absolutely a spectrum. And to be honest, I don't even really know what it means because people use it so interchangeably. I think in the way that you're describing it, it's you know, people in workstations more so than private offices. You know, it's a more open air environment, that sort of thing. And I guess our claim to this whole thing has been, if you follow trends and if you follow, you know, what are sometimes, you know, sources that may or may not be validated to speak on a certain topic, then yes, it probably will be bad for your organization too. I feel the exact same way about remote work, where if you just follow what Twitter's doing, or if you follow what Eric Schmidt says as Google, it's probably going to be bad for your organization too. You know, our whole piece around this is work through a process of understanding the purpose or the why behind why you might design a space a certain way, or why you might occupy a space a certain way. You know, related to your specific question, I'm not a health expert, so I'm not going to, everything I'm saying is just my own opinion. But I think there is absolutely risk when you're around more people that a virus spreads. I think that's, you know, I don't think I need to not be a health expert to make that statement. But, you know, I think a lot of it comes down to just individual rights around people's comfort level of going back into the office. You know, for example, one of our first questions to our organization is, do you feel comfortable coming back in the office? Yes or no? And if your answer is no, you don't owe us a reason why. we're not going to ask any other questions. That just is what it is. And we absolutely respect that. And so I think that's where it comes to understanding that inherently, if you go into office, I don't care if it's open or closed or whatever it is. I mean, I think we're seeing more data come out that says nobody really knows exactly how or where or for how long this virus can live on certain surfaces or that sort of thing. So inherently, if you're around more people, you have more risk to catch the virus. And so knowing that, sure, there might be moderately more risk related to being in an open environment versus a private office environment. But again, I think a lot of that's just centered around being around more people and the density factor that will, expose people to the virus further. And again, we're talking about a 12 to 18 month time period. That's more concerning, I think, than the long term once a vaccine or something is created for the virus.
Mm-hmm. If a significant number of employees, we all continue to work remote, you're saying, some people say, no, they're not ready to come back. And that keeps going. What do you think the impact is of business leaders really reevaluating how much space they actually need? Maybe they keep that office. They're not saying goodbye to the office forever, but maybe I don't need a desk for everybody. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, I think the good news is we've actually seen this play out in the last 10 years or so. I've been reading some articles in the last few weeks about organizations like IBM, HP, and Yahoo, and those are just to name a few, that had sent either all or a large percentage of their workforce to work remotely on more of a permanent basis. Interestingly enough, most of them, all of them called workers back to the office in some form or fashion. As they did exit interviews, you'll be shocked to know that, a lot of the exit interviews gave data that the people didn't feel as connected to their coworkers or connected to the organization. Also, I think it was IBM. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was IBM that's marketing department had called their workforce back because of this idea of innovation and kind of collaboration and connectivity. So funny enough, the two reasons why I think the office space has value going forward have been validated by some of the biggest corporations over the last 10 years or so. So again, I think, as we mentioned earlier, there's a spectrum. There's some companies that will be on the more aggressive side of that spectrum relative to remote workforce. And there are some companies that will be closer to what things looked like prior to the pandemic taking place. From a pure market perspective, not every company has the opportunity to act on their physical footprint right now, whether they own a building or they have a lease that's in place for another 4 or 5 years, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because I think it gives them a period of time to not make a big organizational change decision, but maybe do some trials in that time period with these different things before making a more, capitally intensive or time commitment intensive time decision. So from a pure office market perspective, I think the two competing forces of remote work, which should tell you that companies need less space than what they did before, and social distancing, which would tell you that companies need more space than before, will kind of work themselves out over the next, 2 to 3 years. But I do think that certainly in bigger cities where the barriers to, health and safety and efficiency are higher. And what I mean by that is you have, public transit commutes. Like, who in the world wants to get on a train right now and commute into a city, sit on something for an hour to hour and a half around a bunch of people in a highly dense situation like that? I think there's a lot of fear around people in those types of situations. And then let's just say that you didn't take public transit in, but you drove in or you got dropped off. Once you get to the building, we're hearing things about 4 people in an elevator at a time for some of these, multi-million square foot buildings. I heard most recently that there's an app that has been created that when you show up at your building helps you monitor the amount of wait time to get from the floor of your building up to your space. And some were saying that it could take between an hour and an hour and a half from the time you arrive at the building to get to your office space. That's 80 floors up in some of these bigger cities. So, I mean, you think about, you think about those things. There's the health and safety risk, and then there's just the efficiency risk. Like, if I'm a business leader, I'm not going to have my people spending 5 hours a day commuting and waiting to get up to the space when they can work at home. And again, some of these things will be near-term, challenges. Some could convert to more long-term, challenges or create more long-term strategies. But I think all that said, the bigger cities, there is a more of a value or case for remote work than cities like Indianapolis because of those public transit and kind of congestion and density factors that that exist more in those markets than do in ours.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Well, and even some of the organizations that I know I've talked to in the past few weeks that have, a large population here in the Midwest, I think to your point, Matt, I think they've in the past 10 years, they've renovated their workplace strategy so that it's more of a true ecosystem of different types of spaces so that people can kind of have choice and control in how they work. And I think they've made a big investment there. So rather than trying to, quickly reconfigure and maybe make a knee-jerk reaction, I think they're trying to take a more of a wait and see approach and wait until people feel safe to come back. And then once they come back, I mean, it certainly won't be the same, but they're not feeling like they have to make a big shift right now, which I think is really, it's a good thing, right? I mean, it does give them time to take a pause and see what this looks like in the future. And I do think once there is a vaccine, right, that's going to be a game changer too. And we can't even imagine what that's going to look like. But I do agree that, we are in the Midwest. It's kind of a unique situation, right? Because we have a kind of a mix of kind of the downtown businesses, but businesses that are also, in the suburban areas, right? So, so I think that's going to be a big difference.
Yeah, we've heard a lot around, again, this is at the national level from some of my peers in bigger cities around the flight to the burbs, which is so funny because there's just been this huge push to flight to urban, flight to density downtown. And now it's like so quickly the flight changes and planes aren't even flying right now. So that analogy is kind of funny in itself. So it is an interesting dynamic. One interesting thing that I experience here just locally is we have a technology client who has 150 full-time employees in their workforce in their Indianapolis office. And they had a situation where they were renewing their lease for another 12 months. Their lease expires at the end of June. And I talked to the CFO, the leaders of the business in the last couple of weeks. And he said, you know what? I'm thinking that we just let this lease expire and that we continue working remotely, because for us to extend by another 12 months, everything I'm reading about coming back into the workplace and all the processes and procedures and cleaning and the risks and all that stuff, he said it seems like it's easier and safer if we can do it effectively for that time period. Again, not forever, but for the next 12 months to just keep working remotely and to not even have the office as an option because of everybody trying to figure out what's the right way, what's safe, what's healthy, And so and again, this is unique because they had the ability to do this based on how their office lease was structured, but to literally say, we're going to work from home, but we're absolutely going to have a space going forward. We're just going to wait and see and observe, Mary Beth, to your point, which I think is incredibly wise, how different organizations respond, how the virus spreads or doesn't spread as people re-enter the workplace. And then we'll formulate a strategy with data versus speculation.
Absolutely. I think if everyone could take a pause, like for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, I think you're going to know more about what you need at that point, right? So if you can, right? I mean, you're right. Some people don't have that option to wait, but if you can wait, I think that is very wise.
Absolutely. No doubt.
Yeah, this conversation, we could go on and on, right? I mean, there's so much. And Matt, you're going to have to come back and talk to us in a few months and see where we are then and a few months from there. Absolutely. And kind of just keep gauging this as we kind of move through this phasing part of all this. So thanks, guys, for being here. Matt Waggoner and Mary Beth Oakes. We're so thankful. Join us next time. Thanks, guys. Join us next time for the More Than a Chair podcast. Join us next time. Thanks, guys. Join us next time for the More Than a Chair podcast.